It's a losing proposition to try to compete with existing market shares unless you have identified a gap in the market where you can do something at least 10x better. With Ethereum, obviously it existed, and Solana was roughly a 10x improvement in terms of throughput, user experience. And with the developer experience, I wouldn't say it was 10x better, but it was certainly 10x different. Now that there's Solana, what is the next 10x thing that can meaningfully compete with it on some market gap that it's not looking at? If I'm putting on my startup or business hat here, then I would say, okay, it's not going to be performance. It's probably not going to be cost. What else is there? So you fundamentally need to look at those differentiators.
This episode is brought to you by Chaos Labs, one of the leading on-chain risk management firms. You'll be hearing more from them later in the show. This episode is brought to you by Ledger, the most secure hardware wallet trusted by 7 million users and securing 20% of the world's digital assets. We'll be hearing more from them later in the show. If you like the Lightspeed podcast, then you need to subscribe to the Lightspeed newsletter, written by a team including yours truly and delivered to your email inbox daily. Lightspeed is your essential daily briefing on all things Solana. Exclusive news, deep analysis, and the latest trends delivered in a way that's digestible and, I think, sometimes kind of funny. Stay ahead of the curve with the same insights that guide readers from Brevin Howard, Gemini, Jito, CME Group, Solana Labs, and Foundation, and many more. The link to sign up can be found in today's show notes or if you go to blockworks.co. Subscribe to the Lightspeed newsletter today. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Lightspeed. I'm your host, Jack Kubanek, joined today for a roundup by my co-host and Solana's Chief Crime Officer, Mert Mumtaz. Mert, how are things going, man?
Good, just committing some crimes.
Man, it's been kind of like a boring, interesting week for me. I don't know about you, but as I was prepping for this roundup, looking at the news items, it's like the prices are near all-time highs. Sol could hit an all-time high today, potentially. Bitcoin is near 100K. But it also feels like things have come to a standstill a little bit. And maybe I just got spoiled by the kind of week after the election when all these listings were happening and all sorts of movement. But I don't know about you, but it's like a week where a lot is happening, but not necessarily a ton of new stuff at the same time.
I think people in crypto have a dopamine deficiency syndrome or a perpetual dopamine rat chase syndrome, something like that, which is something I've noticed a while ago, which is, Bitcoin is, what is Bitcoin at? It is at 96K. And a few weeks ago, if it was over 69K, people would go nuts. And now they don't even feel anything unless it's over 100. And then once that happens, they probably won't feel anything until it's over 200. Same with memes, same with really anything in crypto. Once you get that dopamine, you just need more and more and more and more. Really the same as drugs or alcohol or binge watching a Netflix show. And I personally, that's one of the reasons why I don't trade. I like to think of myself as a long-term investor because I think I fried my dopamine receptors as a child or something, but I don't get excited by these things. And so I need to focus on something else to make me excited. And so for me, for example, it's been a very non-boring week because there's a lot of developers coming to Solana or that are already on Solana, and they're having scaling issues, and we have to help them optimize their code or migrate to Solana or teach them Solana or make the RPCs work better. And it's actually one of the busiest weeks of my life, I would say. I haven't been able to sleep too much.
Yeah, I'm curious, Mert, just on the onboarding thing. I've seen you tweeting a lot about this, and there, it's obviously a trend that a lot of Ethereum projects, especially, are deploying on Solana. I'm seeing this happen a lot with the wormhole bridge, where it's sort of you're just bridging assets that deployed on ETH, but maybe not a lot of the infrastructure is moving over to Solana. So as far as projects that are actually making use of your RPCs, deploying all their infrastructure on Sol, what sorts of projects are they? Is it established ones? Is it kind of startups that are building?
I am unable to disclose all of them. There are some big ones. There are also some medium ones and small ones, so it's a good demographic. In general, well, so for example, MakerDAO Sky just migrated over, but there's also in the past, I have to be careful here because there's a bunch I can't disclose, but I'm seeing a lot more newer startups for sure. So for example, the Alliance DAO folks generally tended to go more towards Ethereum, but now maybe there's an equal split between Solana and L2s. And Cosmos teams also seem to be, obviously they're pretty big on interoperability, so, or even near with kind of their new decks. And so there's a lot of different types of applications and teams, protocols, chains, all this stuff happening. And it's really keeping us busy. And then there's obviously people just within Solana. They see the success of Telegram bots, for example, and they want to launch their own Telegram bots or meme coin launchpads or maybe analytics sites for those launchpads. And so that's one of the things I like about the L1 shared state vision, where if there's even one app that takes off, it's kind of like a city where, let's say, there's an Amazon headquarters. Okay, now small businesses around that Amazon headquarters, like the subways and the convenience stores, start getting a bit more traffic, and then maybe the airplanes get more traffic and the tourism. And it's sort of a similar analogy here. And it doesn't seem to be slowing down. So we'll see what happens, but looking great.
Yeah, that's a good point as well about the L1, because I do think we still live in this world where there could be a crypto app that if it truly, truly blows up to like a, mainstream type of way, a random L1 could, become kind of the biggest chain off of that, I think. Obviously there's like consumer apps and financial applications, but sort of, I think that we cover this L1 horse race a lot and talk about, the week's Ethereum drama and how it compares to Solana. And there's just so much that's really not settled and won't be for a long time. And a lot of this could end up looking like the early internet days, arguing about who's onboarding to which new, .com company when Facebook is soon to launch. So it just feels like there's a lot that's unsettled and a lot that can change very quickly in this L1 landscape. But
I tend to find that, for example, when the 2021 bull market happened, most people don't remember, but it was actually really sparked by NBA Top Shot, which were the trading cards shelled by NBA players. And actually, I started buying some of those. I didn't even check the chain, and it was Flow, and Flow raised pretty good money off of that, but now they're kind of not around anymore, as far as I can tell. Or like Polymarket is arguably the one app that's went mass market, and it even has the name Poly in it, but I'm not sure I saw Polygon benefit too much from that. And so I wonder if these apps actually going mainstream would really even affect the underlying chain that much. So my point is that it's probably not agnostic of the use case. So if it's a consumer app, then probably people don't care about the blockchain. But if it's something like Pump That Fund, where you literally had to get a Solana wallet and Solana specific things, where you have to launch this meme, okay, then it might matter. So it really depends on the use cases. So we'll see.
So earlier this morning, as we're recording this, Sui, which is one of the kind of new alt L1s that people are excited about, it's written in the Move programming language, which was developed at Facebook when Facebook had its brief crypto love affair, had an outage related to the scheduler causing validators to crash. And Solana has had its own issues with schedulers and outages and things. And so I guess I wanted to take that moment to just look at the L1 landscape more broadly, because we talk so much about the Ethereum versus Solana horse race. There's a lot of maybe dunking on Ethereum that goes on this show. There's a lot of dunking on Solana that happens on other shows. But I just want to look at kind of the broad ecosystem of L1s. There's lots of different ones, Sui being a popular one. Monad is and Barachain are these highly funded ones that are yet to come to market. I guess you have Move as well. As you look at the L1 landscape, Mert, which chains do you like, or which chains do you really think have a chance to compete for the market share that Solana is claiming right now?
First, I think it's roughly a losing proposition to try to compete with existing market shares. That is, unless you have identified a gap in the market where you can do something at least 10x better, something like that. So, for example, with Ethereum, obviously it existed, and Solana was roughly a 10x improvement in terms of throughput, user experience, even. And with the developer experience, I wouldn't say it was 10x better, but it was certainly 10x different. And so people get interested in that sort of thing. Then the question becomes, okay, now that there's Solana, what is the next 10x thing that can meaningfully compete with it on some market gap that it's not looking at? And I don't think that's performance, because I believe you can get to similar levels of Solana performance, or maybe marginally better, depending on the sacrifices you make. So, for example, a validator set of 50, and maybe that's co-located with some different guarantees. You could probably get close to that, yeah, or maybe even more. But would it be 10x more? I don't see how that's possible. I don't really see any physics that would allow for that to happen, especially if you compare the end state of the different architectures. So then, if I'm putting on my startup or business hat here, then I would say, okay, it's not going to be performance. It's probably not going to be cost. What else is there? Well, I would say Solana's both strength and weakness is the shared state. So the shared state, everything on the same state, is good for composability, atomic composability, even implicit, let's say, coordination between L1 teams or ecosystem teams on the L1, being able to share markets, things like this. That being said, it's not always a good thing. So if there's a problem on the L1, then everybody else has the same problem, even if they did nothing. And so then what I would look at is, okay, perhaps the opportunity is individual custom sovereign block space that does not suffer from the tragedy of the commons problem. And I think that would be interesting. So then what you would look at is either something like a Cosmos, but it's executed better. So, for example, app chains that are interoperable with each other, or a sovereign rollup on something like Celestia. And I think those are the two that I would look at. Or you can go the total opposite way, or at least a different way, where you would say something like, okay, something like private money. So a private payments layer. And I think those are basically the three avenues. And I'm sure there's more. But one of the things that these people get wrong, in my view, and I'm pretty sure I'm correct about this, is that even if you get the same level of performance as Solana or slightly higher, that is not going to be enough to get people to change, right? You're not going to get people to move off of their 2008 Windows computer by releasing a 2009 Windows computer. You need to release the Mac. Or maybe you need to release something totally different, like a Linux desktop. Or again, something totally different, like a PlayStation or a mobile phone. So that's fundamentally the framing I would go with. And so if you look at the other L1s out there, I would say I do like Celestia. I would say in many ways it's the opposite of Solana, where it basically says, yeah, like build whatever rollups you want on top of this. And Solana says, no, don't build rollups, just build everything on the L1. So I like that opposite approach. Obviously, I like Bitcoin. I like Monero and Zcash because I like privacy. And then Barachain could be interesting because they seem to have a different market segmentation of people who are, I believe it started from that NFT community, the Beras. And Monad also seems to have hit a different market segment where it's like maybe people who have been fed up with the EVM on Ethereum and those L2s, and now they have like this other chance. So you fundamentally need to look at those differentiators.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're kind of saying you can't beat Solana by out Solana-ing Solana, if you will. You need to innovate along a different axis. So when Solana comes out, it's a 10x improvement as far as like fees and block times compared to what Ethereum could offer at the time. But you're not probably going to achieve that with the new ones that are coming to market. So if there's something that's going to be a Solana killer, it'll be, like you said, you know, solving for the tragedy of the commons issue or some of the trade-offs that Solana makes. But it won't just be a faster, more performant version.
Yeah, I believe the whole concept of being an X killer is flawed. So, and I strongly recommend people do not say ETH killer for Solana, because it's just not. Solana did not kill Ethereum and does not aim to, especially in the parts that Ethereum tries to succeed at, which would be decentralization and, let's say, high value assets. Solana is still behind on those by quite a bit. That being said, it is much better at other things in different categories. And similarly, I would expect somebody to do the same to Solana. So the thing with trying to out Solana is you are kind of relying on luck. So you basically need to bank on, one, you can execute better than Solana. Two, you can execute better than Solana for a longer period of time, depending on your time horizon. And then three, you're basically banking on Solana not being able to execute simultaneously. And that could happen. But if I'm a businessman, that's not a bet I want to take, because it's not really in my own hands. It's not in my own, I don't have my fate in my own hands. I don't control my own destiny. And as a result, I'm kind of a Peter Thiel LARP or Stan, let's say, but I always like that framing, which is just create a new category and go after a small market that you think will grow. That's what I would. So for example, when Solana was coming out, the L1s were not really the winning, let's say, narrative. The whole of the talk was about the side chains, the L2s, and Solana released an L1 anyways. And I believe something similar needs to happen. I think Sui can be a good competitive force for Solana. I don't really see how it can overtake Solana unless Solana explicitly messes up, at least within the next 3-4 years, unless I see something drastically different.
Chaos Labs, the leading on-chain risk management firm, recently launched its new flagship Oracle product, Edge, which delivers integrated, high-precision risk and price data for any on-chain application with a market. Edge emerged from stealth after 2 months, securing Jupiter, the top swap platform on Solana, already securing $30 billion in volume and more than 60% of all Solana perps volume. Edge is comprised of 3 components: price, risk, and proofs. It delivers high-precision price data with an integrated risk engine powered by Chaos's advanced outlier and anomaly detection algorithm. It automates delivery of real-time parameter adjustments on-chain based on current market conditions, and it enables the secure on-chain delivery of custom data points, including reserve attestations delivered via ZKPs. Most recently, Wintermute announced its selection of the Edge Proofs Oracle for Outcome Market, its new smart contract-based election prediction market tool. Thank you to Chaos Labs for making this episode possible. Celebrating 10 years of innovation, Ledger remains the most secure hardware wallet for your Solana and logins, trusted by 7 million users and securing 20% of the world's digital assets. In recent years, Ledger has built a robust ecosystem of products and services, making digital ownership more secure and accessible to everyone. Ledger's newest devices, Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex, feature the world's first secure touchscreens, making it easier and safer to manage your Solana transactions and coins. With Ledger Live, you can seamlessly and securely manage and stake your SOL. Alongside Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex, Ledger introduced the Ledger Security Key app, a safer alternative to traditional passwords, enhancing your overall digital security. During Black Friday, upgrade to Ledger Flex and get $70 in Bitcoin. Plus, save up to 40% on select Ledger Nano wallets and accessories. Hurry, because these offers are valid until December 5th while supplies last. The thing I have heard about Sui, I keep an eye on it because it's sort of in this alt L1 world. And I was speaking to someone who has built in both the SVM and the Move VM worlds. And he was just saying that the developer experience on Move is much better than Solana. Now, I'm not technical, but does that strike you as a potential way that SWE can compete just along that axis?
So it depends on which part of the developer experience you're talking about. So Move is obviously a smart contract first language. And the thing you need to understand with Move is there's different flavors of it depending on if you're building on SWE or Aptos, which I've heard some people complain about pretty heavily. And what I've also heard is that when these ecosystems give you a grant, they make you sign like an exclusivity deal where you can't deploy on other Move ecosystems. And so there's those. And then there's the read layer, right? So Solana's read layer certainly isn't perfect, but running an indexer or an RPC on Solana or on SWE is not going to be a cake in the walk either, or a walk in the park.
Mixing metaphors there.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why you don't see some of these developer complaints is also going to be due to a lack of actual usage or scale. So, for example, running RPCs on Solana was super easy before the bull market, or I wouldn't say super easy, but certainly way easier. And as activity picks up and you start getting all these bugs, so for example, they just had an outage, you start uncovering these problems and you're like, oh shit. And it becomes harder and harder and harder. And a lot of people from those ecosystems actually ask Helios to come over and help those ecosystems. And like, if those ecosystems had a perfect developer experience, obviously they would not have that need, right? So certainly Move is a step up in many regards in terms of smart contracts, but it's not an apples to apples comparison in my view.
Interesting.
Certainly there are certain things that it does better, and then there are things that the holistic ecosystem does worse. And that's the framing. You need to always look at, so for example, let's say you're deciding between two cars. You're probably not going to buy the car just because one has 5 kilometers higher speed, top speed. It's like, okay, well, what else? What's the warranty? What are the seats? What is the interior? What is the fuel efficiency? All this stuff. So you need to look at the holistic picture. And the question is, okay, is the developer experience on Move so much better that the entire holistic experience, the output score of that gets skewed towards something like that? And if that were the case, we would be seeing it.
Mm-hmm. I'm also curious, Mert. I finally caught up and listened to the episode you did a few ago with Tolly while I was out of town. Y'all, if you have not listened to this episode, it is a great listen. Go check it out right now. It's, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 episodes ago now. But while we're talking about L1s, you kind of asked Anatoly, in a world with cheap and abundant block space where Solana's cheap and fast thing isn't unique anymore, how does Solana continue to compete? And I think Tolly basically says execution. Like, Solana just needs to keep executing and improving the blockchain as fast as it can. And we think that Anza has the people to do that. I don't know if you really gave your take in that show. So I'm curious if you buy his argument or what you think Solana's eventual moat is going to need to be.
I believe the only moat is, yeah, certainly execution is part of it, but executing on what is the question. And I think the fundamental question is, can you attract talent? So the analogy I like to use for this is something like you compare Silicon Valley to something like Wall Street or New York, right? Where the success of the city depends on the output of its individual, let's say, citizens or residents. And with a tech platform, what you need are people who are helping increase the GDP of that, let's say, city or platform. And the way to do that is to have a relentless focus on onboarding founders and startups and really setting them up for success, having infrastructure, having support for them. And if you can kind of keep doing that, then let's say in 10 years, I'm the new Zuck. I'm the next upcoming Jack Dorsey. And I'm like, I have a crypto idea. I want to build this. Where do I go? Well, obviously Solana. And so if the end game is that outcome, then whoever whichever chain is the one that's picked by the most ambitious founders is ultimately the only one that has a moat. So, and by the way, this doesn't have to be a singular moat. So it could be similar to something like iOS versus Android, where I have an app and maybe I deploy it on both of them. Or maybe it's something like a lot of apps these days are actually iOS specific, or maybe it's something like that. So it's going to be the platform that can get apps and founders, obviously upstream of apps, to choose them for more than just one reason. It's not going to be just tech, because we're assuming that the end state is abundant block space, fast everything all the time. It's going to be a combination of liquidity, developer support, ecosystem infrastructure, users, composability, things like this.
And there's another side to this as well, which is you're talking about founders, developers, even like legacy institutions maybe choosing Solana because they think that it's the best tech for what they want to do. But in the current world, there's also this thing where crypto partnerships can be very pay to play. So if I'm a big fintech and I want to launch like a crypto thing, I might go to all of these blockchains and say, hey, how much can you pay in liquidity incentives? Can you give me X sum of money and then we'll launch on your blockchain as opposed to all of the others? This tends to be sort of frowned upon, at least in the online chattering sphere. But I don't think it's inherently negative. Like business partnerships are a thing. If you're doing business development at an L1, you would want to land a big name and you might pay money to make that happen. But I don't know. I remember a month or two ago, there was kind of people saying like, oh, Solana just pays for projects to launch there. And Solana projects are saying, no, nobody paid me. I will say though, like Solana does have, the Solana Foundation has a pretty big grants program. They do, provide grants to have people do like token extensions and things like this. When, the PayPal stablecoin launched, someone was fronting a lot of liquidity incentives. So it's something that
That was
exists
PayPal.
everywhere. But I'm just curious how you think about the kind of, I don't know if pay to play is the right word, but the paid side of all of this as L1s compete to onboard companies that are interested in crypto and land these big partnerships and so on.
Well, this is something I already called out years ago when Solana was at its lowest point. And at the time, Polygon was paying people to kind of launch over to that chain. And I pulled up the funding for both chains. And I said, so Solana, or I said, some chains pay people to use their chain. Solana expects to be paid for people using the chain, which is Tolly's position. And it's the correct position. And the Solana grants thing, it's FUD. It's not real. I know this probably more than really anybody, having been. I know quite a few founders in different ecosystems. Solana pays by far the least, if any. In fact, the biggest criticism of Solana at that time was that Solana never pays anybody ever. And I can pull up tweets about this, and people would get rattled at Solana Foundation. They'd be like, "Oh, like why aren't you paying Starbucks? Why aren't you paying these guys? If these guys leave, we're dead." And Solana's grants are very, very strict, and they're also quite tiny. So something like, I believe we offered to do something pretty substantial, and they're like, "Yeah, we can give like 100K," and we're like, "100K? What is that?" Whereas the newer chains have much bigger grants. And so, for example, you can look at Optimism, where Optimism, I believe, paid something like 40 million in locked OP tokens to Kraken to launch that L2. And this is something that happens a lot in those ecosystems. So the pay to play thing, in my view, is not how it works. Because you, the second you're paying to play, so first of all, you're probably going to be paying an established name, right? So for example, maybe you're going to pay a Sony, which has actually happened, or something like Walt Disney, right? Some studio. And the problem with that is thinking that those companies are capable of first principles innovation in a new space. They are capable of this, but it's I would not bet bank on that, because if you look at the history of tech, it's almost always a new start. Like, for example, ChatGPT and Perplexity and Claude have basically surmounted Google, I would say, in terms of search. I personally don't use Google search anymore. And
Use Perplexity for search?
I use Perplexity.
Oh, fascinating. I need to get away
Yeah.
from Google, man. It sucks these days. It pushes me shopping stuff. Anyways, side note, but that's interesting to
You
hear
really
you've
need to try
broken
it.
out of that.
Yeah. I'll use Google for maps only, basically. But the point I'm trying to make is that paying people to innovate is not something you can do, because that's not the 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 necessary condition for building a product, right? The way to build a product, or a lasting product or a useful product, is you have a founder, or a team of founders, and they want to right a wrong in the world. They have this vision of the world that they want to enact, and they release a product, and they are relentless on focusing on the customer and iterating and being unblocked. And they keep doing this until they have PMF. With the bigger names, what you can do is, if you have something that already works, so let's say something like a video game, and you put some portion of it on chain, and like what that might do is it might help stats for a little bit, but that there's no fundamentally new thing happening there. It's basically like just issuing a new asset. And by the way, that probably is okay. Having more assets issued, if you can kind of get a critical mass of assets being issued on your chain, that's also good, and you have some good liquidity, perhaps. But I don't think, again, I think that's a very marginal improvement, and not necessarily like a big 10x improvement. So I think the innovation comes from teams that basically don't even exist yet, or teams that nobody really saw coming. So, like, obviously 10 years ago, nobody saw Helium or HiveMapper coming, or Pump That Fun even, or really Phantom, right? Phantom is not like this big, massive team. They were a scrappy startup once, and now they're surpassed Coinbase on the App Store. I believe they're actually like 30 spots ahead right now. So I think I would, and by the way, the way to get, to tie this back to my earlier point, the way to get a founder first ecosystem is to cultivate bottoms up company forming and startups and all these things, versus if you have a top down approach, then that's not as founder friendly, because like there could be 10 startups on your chain, and if the chain, let's say the foundation, focuses on NBC as opposed to the 10 startups, the 20 startups on it, those founders will not be like, what the hell, dude? Like, we've been here the whole time. Why are you giving $1 million to these people who don't even need the money? And so you start getting weird incentives.
Yeah, I do agree. I think there's a larger thing involved here too, that we're seeing. There's just kind of like a cultural shift happening where legacy institutions maybe don't have the pull that they once did. And so you mentioned all the Polygon partnerships with Starbucks, I believe Nike at one point, DraftKings was one as well. But I'm especially thinking of like something like Starbucks. That whole project never really went anywhere, and it was sunset 6 months ago or so, because everyone's kind of getting rid of their NFT projects now. But I think maybe the bigger problem that Polygon faced is not that it was paying people to come and develop things on Polygon, but that it was betting on the wrong institutions. Like, you no longer live in a world where just having this big household name is going to be such a draw, because people are just very suspicious of these institutions, or they're no longer as enamored as they were. I mean, because I'm less willing to say maybe that Solana just categorically doesn't pay. Like, I think I don't know all the financials and things, but I would have to think that for something like Fire Dancer, like Jump doesn't work for free. I don't think.
They paid FireDancer for the grant, but
Yeah,
that's like
but
a software optimization as opposed to a corporate deploying an app there.
yeah, exactly. So Jump is like just fundamentally a different team maybe than a Nike or a Starbucks, and so it's about knowing where to put the foundation money to use. Um,
Yeah.
But I don't, even when Optimism sort of paid Kraken to deploy an L2 there, it's if you think that a Kraken L2 is going to be very valuable and you have a foundation that has all of this, like these locked tokens for business development purposes, I don't see that as inherently bad, which is often how it's spoken about, like on crypto Twitter, essentially.
Oh, it's a great deal for Optimism because they give you locked tokens and then they make liquid ETH from the sequencer fees. So it is a good deal for them. But yeah, fundamentally, resources are finite. And so what's the best distribution of those resources? And like, if you take Polygon as an example, imagine if they had more money, let's say, to support Polymarket to help get them over some legal hurdles. Maybe they offered legal support. And maybe Polymarket could have launched in the US. Now, I'm not saying this is like I think Polygon is great, by the way. I'm just giving that as an example where, so for example, I'm obviously on Solana. And if the foundation goes and gives, let's say, Microsoft $50 million for, let's say, blockchain infrastructure into like Microsoft Azure, I would be like, fuck you. Like, what? Like, give me that money. I've done way more. And that's not that would not be a good resource spend there. So it is an individualistic, let's say, case by case basis.
Yeah, and a lot of these like prior partnerships too were doing things that nobody could even really explain. It was like, oh, we're Coca-Cola and we now have a Web3 arm, and what does it do? We don't know, but we have this vague idea that people want NFTs and you can have a bottle of Coke on the blockchain or something. Like, I think that these partnerships that nobody can really explain and don't make sense to your sane mind are just going away in crypto in general. I think like Polygon has done a lot to escape the kind of partnerships chain label, and it's doing interesting stuff with the ag layer and whatnot. So it seems like we're moving into a different kind of world in this market cycle, which is an encouraging thing to see, I think, for crypto.
Mm-hmm.
Let's chat a little bit about Sky, formerly Maker DAO, launched USDS, which is formerly DAI, the decentralized stablecoin, the third largest stablecoin in existence behind Circles and Tether's stablecoins. It just launched on Solana. Mert, you mentioned that maybe you had done some work with them. What was your sort of take or any thoughts on this USDS coming to Solana? How big of a deal is this?
So on a few dimensions, one is I always like seeing more stables on Solana because stables on Solana are not super strong compared to even something like Tron. And I think stables are quite useful. So that's awesome to see. It is also good to see that, I mean, Maker is one of the most OG, if not the most OG protocol, I believe, in all of DeFi. They're certainly first, second, or third in terms of being earliest and most established.
2015, I think it launched. So it's quite old by now.
Yeah. And so seeing OGs like that who obviously grew up, let's say, with one ecosystem explore something as new and different as Solana is promising because obviously they think there's something there. So I like that. And it seems like based on Rune's tweet, they have a lot of integrations already. So like Camino, Margin, Drift, Jupiter, all these things. So that's also good to see. That's also one of the superpowers of an integrated L1, which is that all the integrations are much quicker and you don't need interoperability between them. So that's great. I would say we'll see what happens as time goes on. Obviously, the assets and stables being more prevalent on Solana is a good sign, but on a long-term horizon, that actually needs to be used. So people need to be able to like borrow it, lend it, do productive things with it, and that's the harder part. So while it's exciting and I'm pumped to see it, the proof will be in the execution of where this goes 2 years from now.
Yeah. Would echo a lot of that. DAI was always an Ethereum exclusive thing for 7 years. I believe it launched in 2017. This is now its second chain. Rune is personally like a big fan of Solana. He at some point proposed to do some kind of fork of the Solana code base to create a new chain for Maker or something. This was in 2023. Rune has a lot of forum posts out there, so I don't remember the exact wording of it, but he is a fan of kind of the Solana tech. Hopefully, we're going to have him on the show soon to chat more about this. But yeah, it's also paying a lot in liquidity incentives on all these various platforms, which seems to be the new kind of stablecoin growth strategy. PayPal's stablecoin supply on Solana outpaced Ethereum for a little bit when the amount of liquidity incentives that were being paid was really high. I'm personally kind of skeptical of this. There's a PYUSD whale that I speak to sometimes who I think at one point was the largest holder of PYUSD on Solana. And I pinged him after the USDS deployment on Solana. And I was like, hey, liquidity incentives, are you going to start borrowing a bunch of USDS? And he was like, absolutely not. This is not the market for stablecoins. Whereas I guess a few months ago when PayPal was launching on Solana, it was more of a market where you might want to get yield off of stablecoins. But in the current euphoric bull market, this person, at least, who's a big whale, was sitting it out. So I'll be curious to see if the liquidity incentives are as effective. And, obviously it's a question of, can you get the liquidity to stick around, or is it this mercenary capital that's going to go elsewhere? Another thing you mentioned, Mert, that because I wrote, this news came out first on Blockworks, not to brag, but we did have the story first. And as I was writing it, I got looking at the stablecoin supply on Solana, which I had not done for a little bit. And it's kind of interesting to note because all sorts of metrics, as we talk about, have been going up to all-time highs on Solana. Stablecoins are not one of them. Solana still has, I think, about 2% of the total stablecoin supply. That puts it in like 6th or 5th behind Arbitrum, I believe, even in stablecoin supply. ETH L1 still has like 51%. So my guess is that this is like a meme coin thing, because if you're getting Solana to transact in meme coins, no part of that really requires stable coins, especially with platforms like Pump Fund. But I don't know, Mert, why do you think the stablecoin supply is as low as it is? And is that something that you think is a problem for Solana?
I don't actually know. I believe one of the reasons would be that Tether isn't really as strong on Solana for all sorts of reasons. And I would say Tron and Ethereum already fill that gap. So there's not much of a gap to fill, at least yet. Obviously, the future is a different story. And also within the L2s, it's a pretty good synergy with the L1 for Ethereum. Ethereum already has most of the stables, and so you can kind of extend that to Arbitrum or Base. And what Base also does, obviously, is put, and by the way, Base is, well, not Base, but Coinbase are the people who actually created USDC along with Circle. So they're on the consortium, which obviously pretty non-trivial impact there. And they also they store they're starting to store customer funds on Coinbase as USDC on Base. So there's all sorts of things like that. And on Solana, it's like, okay, what would you use it for? I guess you would use it for borrow and lend, but the borrow and lend ecosystem, with the exception of Camino, is perhaps not, certainly not as mature as Ethereum. So a long way to go there. But then also for real world payments, it's like, I believe Tron already, weirdly enough, has a lot of sway there. And so again, this is something where you can't be like 2x better. You need to be 10x better. And so we'll need to see what that is. I would like to see, and I would say quality assets are always lag behind the speculative assets. So my optimistic case would be, okay, now that institutions have seen that the chain has a lot of revenue and sustainability and all these things, okay, maybe we can now start putting more RWAs and stables on this chain as well. And because like it's not the other way around. It's not like you put solid assets and then the meme coins follows the other way around. So the optimistic case is just a matter of time. The pessimistic case is that there's no use for it because it's already being served by other chains? I don't know the answer.
So is it accurate to say that in like the 21 cycle before I was in crypto, you needed stablecoins more to do speculative things because to do like yield farming, you needed to have like a stablecoin pair with whatever you were trading. And so it was more important liquidity back then. And so there just was more need for stablecoins for these speculative use cases.
Certainly, you would require more stables during DeFi summer in 2021 than, let's say, meme coin summer, where if you're holding stables, then you probably missed out on like a 5,000x plus or minus. So this also kind of goes along with the dopamine syndrome that I was talking about, which is like, and also interest rates are obviously higher now, where like, for example, do you store assets on chain in stable yield and get like 3%, 4%, or do you just go take T-bills and get, I don't know, 5, 6%? So there's also that aspect of it as well. But so I think it is kind of, and I'm not going to be one of those guys who talks about macro or micro or anything. I don't know shit about that. But I just don't see it being, let's say, super useful as solve. So like the only thing that comes to mind is something like payments. And payments, for it to make real sense in terms of like, let's say, stable metrics, you need very large volumes and very large frequency. And I don't think that's there yet, but we'll see if it gets there.
Yes, well, it'll be interesting to see how the stablecoin market grows or doesn't grow on Solana. Do things like Sling Money or Perenna, these new startups, kind of grow that pie? It'll be one to watch. DeFi Llama has a good dashboard for the stablecoin market share breakdown. Sadly, that is all the time we have for today. But Mert, it's been an excellent roundup. Thank you so much for joining me. Be sure to follow along. Get us on Twitter to see when the new episodes drop. Join our Telegram group. There's a link on the Twitter as well. And we will catch you all in the next one.